Day Speaker Series. I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Eliza Tong from the UC Davis Health Systems and Project Director Kimberly Homer Vagadori from California Youth Advocacy Network. So first, Dr. Tong. So Dr. Tong is an associate professor of internal medicine at UC Davis Health Systems. She received her BA, MA, and MD at Stanford University and did her residency at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center in San Jose. Her research interests are in tobacco control policy and cessation, with special interest in secondhand smoke and diverse and underserved populations. She is the founding director of UC Quits, which is the UC-wide tobacco cessation network across 5 UC medical centers. She has received numerous honors and awards from both the health system and her discipline in recognition of her work. My second introduction is Director Homer Vagadori. Director Homer Vagadori is the project director for the California Youth Advocacy Network. She did her undergraduate at UC Davis in political science and has been working in the tobacco control policy space for the last 18 years and is an expert in the field. She provides technical assistance and training to local, state, and national organizations on issues related to tobacco and the environment, emerging tobacco products, campus-based cessation services, and the targeting of youth by the tobacco industry. Today, Dr. Tong and Director Homer Vagadori will talk on understanding the new tobacco epidemic for California, flavored tobacco products. Please join me in welcoming them both to UC Center Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. This is an extremely hot topic, and I can tell you as a health provider, a lot of health providers don't even know what to say about this. So I take this talk today as just trying to share some things about what we're learning about this very interesting phenomenon, and you can call it a social experiment that's happening right now. And I'm just so glad that Kimberly Homer Vagadori is also part of this today because the first time I got a call from our CEO's office about get on the news, they want something about Juul, and I was like, I know the person that I need to ask because Kimberly works with youth and young adults statewide, and she's on the forefront of what's going on. The providers, we're just trying to catch up with what is going on. So really, what I'd like to do today is just say, you've probably heard in the news, there's a Surgeon General has said vaping is a youth epidemic. We must take action now to protect the health of our nation's young people. Those are very powerful words. We thought we were getting a hold of the tobacco epidemic and that it was the developing world that was going to be, that we needed to help from here on out. But what we've seen even in just 1 year, and you may have heard this also in the news, because these were some studies that came out, e-cigarette usage by high school students increased by almost 80% in 1 year from 2017 to 2018. 1 in 4 high school students have used a tobacco product. And when you say tobacco, that Kim is going to show you what that includes. It's not just cigarettes anymore. And even e-cigarettes is not even quite the term to use anymore. 4 out of kids who have used tobacco started with a flavored product. So that's why that's the topic for flavors today. And then kids report vaping as early as 12 years old. We've had over 50 years of tobacco control, meaning tobacco control is where we're trying to create an environment where no one needs to use tobacco, and also the people who are using, we create a supportive environment for them to quit because, as Kimberly reminded me, tobacco is one of those things, it's harmful to health and there's no benefit in using it. Why are we slipping now? How did this happen, and what does it mean for California? And we're with the California Tobacco Control Program, we've had lots of successes that are internationally recognized. So today, each of these topics can be a whole hour in itself. We're just going to give you just glimpses of things we'd just like to share. The policy history, again, this could be a whole course. What does it mean for California and health concerns? That's what I'll touch on. And then we're going to switch in about 20 minutes so she can touch on these last parts of what are some of these products, schools and colleges, what's the impact, and then also just some information about local action to date. So it's been over 50 years that we know that tobacco or smoking causes lung cancer. Before this, we used to have lots of ads that even say more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. I mean, you could pretty much say anything you wanted out there. And in fact, when there were first some scientific studies saying, oh, the people who are smoking, they're actually having lung cancer. Actually, a med student was one of the first people who put that together when they were rotating through the hospital. And then they were doing mice experiments with tar and seeing that caused cancer. The tobacco industry actually in the 50s put out full-page newspaper ads, which is interesting to see. This is a strategy they've done since 1954, saying a frank statement to cigarette smokers and pretty much the whole public saying, you've probably heard there's some risks with cancer and we're dedicated to public health. We're going to do something about it. We don't think that these studies are actually, very concerning right now. We've got this. And that's been something that that's been some of the things that they have said on the public side. And what you find later with lawsuits and whatnot, when you've seen some of their internal documents, you see all of the frank discussion that happens behind closed doors. But in the 60s, 1964, that's when the first U.S. Surgeon General report came out. This is Luther Terry on the right, saying definitively, smoking is causing cancer. This is concern for us. And then over 50 years later, we're still adding diseases in their reports. And we know it's not just cancer now. We know cardiovascular disease is super important. Almost more people die of cardiovascular disease than cancer. Sometimes it's like, people are trying to say, what's the number lately? But over 480,000 deaths annually. And then secondhand smoke is also a very important growing area as well that they've recognized, where 45,000 non-smokers every year die of exposure to secondhand smoke. So the science is continuing to grow about tobacco and health. And then what is tobacco control doing about it? In the 60s, that's when you first started seeing the FTC start putting restrictions on what you can advertise about smoking on radio and TV, again, kind of controlling some of those social norms that kids and everybody else are exposed to. But those are for cigarettes. I've had people ask me, why do I hear advertisements on TV and radio now? Well, those aren't cigarettes, and those laws were made for cigarettes. So again, we're kind of dealing with things that we thought that were in place from over 50 years ago. 70s to 80s, no disco music here, but this lady wearing this nice pink jumpsuit. I don't know if any of you guys remember, some of you were not born for sure, about low tar. And low tar, this is not going to cause you cancer. Go ahead and use this because it's great even for women. It's light. It'll make you healthier. We've only got a little bit of tar. You won't get that much cancer. And then, at the same time, as I mentioned, we're building up all this growing evidence of science, which takes years to show for cancer. And then at the same time, we see a lot more evidence about immediate health effects for things like secondhand smoke, where you think it's just something smelly in the air, but no, it's actually more toxic per gram as all these chemicals change in the air than mainstream smoke that you smoke from a cigarette. And non-smokers, their cardiovascular state gets to become like a smoker's within 7 days of just an hour exposure every day. So the Surgeon General came out with a report in 1986 about the health consequences of involuntary smoking to non-smokers. So this is the basis of a lot of our smoke-free laws, and where California Tobacco Control Program has been a major leader in the way. But even when I was growing up, there was still things called non-smoking sections. And people joke that, that's kind of like saying there's a no peeing section in the pool. It just kind of goes all over anyway with the ventilation. So we know that the best thing for people's health is clean air, to breathe clean air, and how do we support that social environment and people, who use tobacco so that we can all enjoy health. So as I mentioned, there was a lot of internal discussions behind the tobacco industry's closed doors. There were some whistleblowers that produced some of the internal documents that were protected by attorney-client privileges. Some of you in the room may remember the Attorney General sued the tobacco companies for recovering Medicaid healthcare costs for all the diseases that tobacco caused. Yet at the same time, the public face of things, the tobacco companies, that picture on the upper right that you can't see so well, those are all the tobacco industry executives, the CEOs. They were called before Congress, and each one of them down the line said, I believe nicotine is not addictive. Although all those internal documents were showing at the time, yes, they did know it was addictive and they were manipulating it. So this whole body of evidence, where before the tobacco industry, you couldn't win a lawsuit because they always said that's the smoker's fault that they got cancer and died, because we put the Surgeon General's warning saying, you know, this is not really that good for you. But at the same time, all these lawsuits led up to what's called in 2006, the U.S. Department of Justice lawsuit, and where they issued a verdict that the industry for years had been violating what's called the Civil Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations laws, RICO laws, which is what they got the mob for. And the statement that they say is the industry continues to engage in and execute a 50-year scheme to defraud the public on health effects, marketing to children. And so I also bring this out because, you know, this is kind of relevant. It took over 10 years for the corrective statements. They didn't have to pay anything. They were just supposed to issue corrective statements out to public. Took them over 10 years to do it. Have any of you seen this? It's the black and white sort of thing. You can watch it on YouTube now. But it looks like a very boring Surgeon General's warning, where some of these corrective statements say, yes, there are adverse health effects of smoking. Yes, there's addictiveness of smoking and nicotine. Yes, lack of health benefits from smoking low-tar, light, ultralight, mild, natural cigarettes. And the DOJ said they were deceptively marketed as less harmful, but there wasn't science behind it. But by the time science caught up to it, they found it really didn't matter. People compensate for the nicotine. Doesn't matter what the machine says about low tar or light. And then also that there were adverse health effects of exposure to secondhand smoke. This is hot off the press also because there was a study this past week published in JAMA Network Open that said even though this was supposed to be corrective action on a nationwide level, when you surveyed people, U.S. adults, 40% and actually even less for key demographics that tend to smoke more, were even aware that this campaign was going on. I happened to see one on late night TV. Not that I watched a lot of TV, but people get their information a lot differently these days. So I just wanted to share that with you so at least everyone in the room knows that these statements are out there. But I think a lot can be learned even from this whole low tar thing. It was, people thought that it didn't cause as much cancer, and yet it took many years for it to come out and say it doesn't, and you need to stop marketing these things. So you don't see these products anymore. So 2009, it was like, okay, now what's the next step forward? Everyone's looking for the reboot, the refresh. Food and Drug Administration, finally, they were given authority to regulate the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products. So approval to market, approval to make any cessation or reduced harm claims. You're going to say this helps you to quit smoking, or it's going to help you with your smoking. You actually need to go through this FDA process. And the FDA also funds academic centers for what's called TCORs, Tobacco Centers of Regulatory Science. So UCSF is one, for example. USC is another, where they're trying to develop the science on some of these products. But at the same time, again, it takes years for some of this to come out. How many of you know FDA actually banned flavors in cigarettes? Some in the room, yeah. There are no flavored cigarettes except menthol, which was argued at the time by the industry as, well, this is an important flavor that people like. So we're learning more science about that too, and I'll share with that in a moment. And then finally, even though FDA has the authority, like many things in the government, it takes a long time, and there's many interests at play. There's actually a moratorium on regulating e-cigarettes until 2022. So there's authority, but there's a hold, there's a pause on actually knowing what's in any of these things. And when I tell this to my fellow providers, they're really shocked because these things are out there in the market. We thought someone was going to look after it, but so this is something that is also quite controversial right now. All right, California's data. Let me see if I can go through some of these highlights. So California Tobacco Control Program, again, we've been doing a great job, comprehensive tobacco control, education, going out to the schools, supporting people with smoke-free social norms and policies and creating opportunities for people to quit. So we're declining, cigarette smoking, 10%. But this is still 2.8 million people because we have a large state, and we know that there are disparities throughout the state, and so those, red hot areas, we know they have higher smoking rates as well. But we're doing a better job than the U.S., so, that's great news. At the same time, this whole vaping epidemic, we're starting to see signs that we're slipping on a lot of this. And so young adults, California young adults, which are people under 30, and you can't really see this, but the slides will be made available afterwards, so you can blow this up later. And these are all figures hot off the press from California Tobacco Control Programs, facts and figures. On the left-hand side, you can see that the age under 30, they actually have higher tobacco use rates than the people on the right-hand side, which are people who are age 30 or older, mature adults. But the yellow bars, what that shows are how many people are using flavored tobacco products. And the very far left of that bar is cigarettes. So you can see the older folks are still using cigarettes, but then you can see there's a wider array of products that the young adults are using, and a lot of them are flavored. So 24% of young adults using tobacco products, where we were celebrating 10% of a smoking prevalence statewide. California youth, so now we're talking about high school students and lower, they have almost a 13% tobacco use rate, and about 85% of them vape, and about the same amount use flavors. So again, that yellow bar, you can see that the majority of them use flavored tobacco products. So this is something, at least for me, I take care of adults. These are my future patients. So that's what's especially alarming to me, is that this wave is coming, and are we prepared to even talk about this? Youth subgroups, this is just a quick slide to show that even though I gave this prevalence number of about 13%, there are higher rates in certain subgroups. So we know kids who are maybe identify as LGBT or certain racial ethnic groups that already have higher tobacco use rates in their communities. So for example, American Indian, and then the 12th graders, they are already higher as well. And that, of course, that's like 15%. So when we talk about that 80% vaping epidemic in 1 year, we are seeing it here in California youth just in this 1 year. So from 2017 to 2018, that bar on the right, it shows that we've had a 45% increase. Great for us, it's not 80% like the rest of the US, but that's because we've had such a strong tobacco control program. Yet at the same time, when we were looking at this school district data, 24 counties were above that 13% that you see here. 8 counties reported kids were using it, 23 to 34%, so a third of the kids in the school district who are 11th or 12th grade. So this should really be alarming to all of us, and I guarantee you a lot of parents and providers have no clue even what these products are or what to say about it or what to do about it. A lot of it's online. Look up your school district dashboard, just because I think the power of California tobacco control is also based in what happens at the grassroots in your local communities. So you yourself can look up to see what are the current past month e-cigarette use in your local school district. Health concerns, let me touch on this briefly. Again, this can be a very long talk in itself. So what's in an electronic smoking device? People think that vaping is cleaner, but it's not. You hear the things of, oh, there's nothing worse than burning a cigarette. We actually don't really know. There might be some fewer carcinogens, but as a Lancet editorial said, it's naive to think that fewer carcinogens mean that it's better health. There's all these other chemicals in there. So besides nicotine, you have volatile organic compounds, you have ultrafine particles. So, we've all been exposed to the fires and the smoke. You're not supposed to go out there because anytime you inhale particles, you're going to have inflammation of your cardiopulmonary health. There's still cancer-causing chemicals. There's heavy metals, such as nickel, tin, and lead, and the flavors as well. Diacetyl, for example, is in many of these products. And then there's growing scientific evidence, many of which is coming from the UCs, of harms from these products. So cellular toxicity from an early stage, particulates that worsen lung function, as I mentioned, the cardiovascular system. You have impaired arterial dilation, or the way that your cardiovascular system can respond, and immune function. On the last 50th anniversary tobacco Surgeon General's report, they noted that tobacco causes immune problems. So rheumatoid arthritis, even your medications. There's a whole host of things that we don't yet have packaged into a nice Surgeon General's report. That all that literature is out there. Flavors, easy to hit. So menthol, it's actually very interesting. It's not just a minty flavor, not just a brand. It's thought to, facilitate initiation because it has an anesthetic capacity to numb the back of your throat. So people who used to cough when they first tried a cigarette, it makes it a lot smoother going down. And then you have deeper inhalation. And actually, there's literature out there to say it probably acts on the nicotine receptors as well, and it makes it harder for you to quit. And then there's also the social justice issue about marketing. 70% of California African Americans who smoke use menthol. And then pricing, I don't know if Kimberly Bankston Lee's here, but she's the one who pointed out, hey, in Oak Park, which is one of Sacramento's African American neighborhoods, they're selling it for 75 cents cheaper than in East Sac, which is, why is that? There's pricing strategies to develop this market. And then again, on the flavors, I mentioned diacetyl is found in 3/4 of these flavored e-liquids, and it's linked to something called popcorn lung, which causes irreversible lung damage. Doesn't mean that every time you use it, it's going to cause lung damage, but you are at greater risk for getting this down the line. Again, we don't know the difference between eating flavors versus inhaling flavors, and also heated chemicals react differently than burned chemicals. We're still learning more about this. I think for me, working on secondhand smoke science before, learning that the industry did studies showing that, as things off-gas from the carpet and chairs and upholstery, it's getting more toxic with those chemicals reacting in the air. You realize we don't really understand how these things work. The nicotine, easy to addict, and I know Kim is going to talk about this a little bit more, but there's a lot of concern for the developing brain, and the brain is said to mature about at 25 years, and hopefully it's not all downhill from there, but nicotine is one of the most addictive substances that's out there, and we know that, as I mentioned before, machine data is not real life, that the industry manipulated nicotine in cigarettes by basically freebasing it by lowering the pH so you could absorb more of it. And there's nothing, even compared to some of the medications we have, there's nothing that gets you more nicotine than a cigarette within the first 5 minutes. And users can compensate. Even if you're going down in the number of cigarettes, you can suck harder, you can cover holes, you actually can compensate for that nicotine. And now we have these new nicotine salts, which have high bioavailability. We're not even really sure we understand how this works and how to dose nicotine medication for these things. The 1 pod of Juul is supposed to be 1 pack of cigarettes worth of nicotine, but we're not even sure. It's probably even more. It depends on how people use it. And nicotine itself is not harmless. You're basically having a stimulant that's stressing out your cardiovascular system. At some point, it's going to take its toll. So what I tell folks, and I teach the med students and the residents about this too, right now in the US, we don't recommend e-cigarettes for cessation, even though you may hear that the UK says, in a nutshell, we think it's 95% less harmful to you, and we think that this will help smokers. But I always emphasize this is still not what we're supposed to do, according to the US Preventive Services Task Force, which is what we follow for best practice guidelines. And you may have heard I just want to point this out, not getting too much into this study, but e-cigarettes for smoking cessation, this New England Journal of Medicine article that came out that said, so e-cigarettes help people quit a little bit more than nicotine replacement therapy. So a lot of my colleagues took home the point of maybe we should be telling people then, after all, to use e-cigarettes. But when you look at the editorial with this and understand the full context of the story, the folks who were in the e-cigarette arm of this trial to quit, they quit cigarettes, but they switched to e-cigarettes, and 80% of them were still using e-cigarettes. So they didn't quit tobacco, they quit cigarettes for the time being. And so there's always this concern of people going back to tobacco products or what's called dual use, which there's more growing concern that e-cigarette and smoking cigarettes at the same time is like maybe doubly bad for you. There's a lot of growing evidence about this. So I just want to be careful that people make sure they understand the terminology. Smoking is just a subset of tobacco. And by the way, the folks on the nicotine replacement arm, less than 10% were still using any of the nicotine medications. So I always remind the folks I educate and also my patients that there are 7 FDA approved tobacco cessation aids, 5 of which are nicotine replacement therapies. You've heard of the patch, the lozenge, the gum, and actually in combination, long act and short acting, just like what we do for opiates, it actually is more effective for people to titrate themselves. And then there are higher potency nicotine things, a nasal spray and an inhaler. But the key thing, when that picture down there is of the inhaler, you can see it's not like an asthma inhaler. That is just absorbed through the back of your throat and your buccal mucosa. It's not into your lungs. So you don't get that same particulate effect that you do from vaping. And then there's 2 pills as well. So there's a whole armamentarium for people to try and try again. And maybe it's not dosing high enough for some of the folks who are just trying it over the counter and said, I tried it, it didn't work. Sometimes we have to really go through it. So let's transition here now to Kim to talk about the products themselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. So I'm going to talk about what these products are just briefly. I could spend 4 hours going over all of the new products. I want to also note that these products come up so quickly that we often don't hear about them until we hear about them from young people. And so they are constantly changing. They are not regulated, so they are popping up left and right. So when we talk about tobacco, we are talking about a larger picture of cigarettes, which we have, and we know, as Dr. Tong mentioned, they're not flavored with the exception of menthol, which a lot of people actually believe we created a public health nightmare for African Americans in our country by exempting menthol in the 2009 FDA bill. We also have little cigars and cigarillos. When we talk to young people about these products, they are predominantly flavored and often used to smoke marijuana, although sometimes also used to smoke tobacco. What's so different about little cigars is they're regulated different. So the primary difference, besides them being a larger product, is that the wrapping is tobacco, so they're classified differently, which means they can be sold in flavors, which means they're easier to access and easier to use, and a lot of people think they have less harm. They also don't have to be sold in packs of 20, so they're cheaper. You can go to different neighborhoods and get little packs of these little cigars for under $1. So there's a lot of issue when it comes to these other flavored products. Hookah, which we have dealt with a lot in the college population, the majority of hookah bars in the state of California are within 1 mile of a college or university campus here. So we obviously know who is using these products. Hookah is just tobacco that's flavored either with molasses or honey, and then it's burned in a pipe. There's other things added into it to make it taste fruity. And the idea, there's a lot of misperceptions around this product. There's this idea that because it doesn't taste as bad or it's not a cigarette, it's less harmful. It's just as harmful, and in cases even more harmful, because you're sitting around inhaling it if you're using it and inhaling it because you're sitting around a smoking session for over an hour. Smokeless tobacco, which our prevalence data has actually not changed considerably, and we have some populations that use this product at higher levels. So when we talk about military communities and veterans, they're using this nonstop, which means we're getting a lot of addiction throughout the day. And then there's other newer products like snus. So snus is the tobacco industry's way of getting people to use smokeless tobacco who wouldn't normally dip or chew. So you pack snus in your upper lip, and instead of spitting it, you just swallow the saliva. So just another strategy to try to addict people who live in a smoke-free state where you can't smoke indoors. So they need to figure out a way to continue that nicotine addiction when you can't smoke. So that's when snus was introduced. Snus, there was a lot of marketing behind snus. Our news and review here in Sacramento used to have pop-in guides and things for bar events in Sacramento to promote snus. It was really popular until vaping. So e-cigarettes came onto the market. We talk about there's 4 generations of e-cigarettes. So the first generation are the cigalikes. They look like a cigarette. When we talk to young people about cigalikes, they think that they are cigarettes. Cigarette is in the name of an e-cigarette, therefore it translates to being bad. These are low-powered devices that use a freebase nicotine, so users can't usually get the nicotine they're looking for, so that's where a lot of the dual use or use of cigarettes and vaping devices go hand in hand. The next generation are the pens, so you'll see those more on the left-hand side of that lower picture. These are hookah pens or the vaping pens that you can fill with your own solution. Interestingly, these used to be mostly used to vape nicotine, but now when we talk to schools and when we talk to youth, these pens are predominantly being used to vape THC oils and THC solutions. But you can use them to vape both or combine the products. The third generation are the mods or the tanks. So those came out when people started to recognize that they weren't getting the nicotine levels that they needed from vape pens because they were smaller. And so if you increase the power of these devices, you can increase the amount of nicotine that you're getting through the vapor. You can always tell when somebody is vaping one of these devices because there's massive clouds around them. There's also cloud chasing competitions. There's a whole culture around this. There's prize money around cloud chasing competitions where you're essentially blowing smoke rings and making designs out of the aerosol that you have. These products are still using the freebase nicotine. These are also the devices I want to note that are more likely to blow up, which happens, catch fire in your pocket, blow up in your face. There was a recent death actually from somebody whose vaping device blew up. And then the newest device that we're dealing with are these new pod systems. So Juul is the most well-known. Juul was kind of the one that really kicked this off. So there's a couple of things that are really unique about this newest generation of devices. So the first is their size. They have been able to take a smaller battery device, but able to get more nicotine out of that. And that's because they switched from using that freebase nicotine that Dr. Tong talked about to using a nicotine salt solution. So Juul, again, was really the first company to come out and do this. And they have a nicotine salt solution. It's easier on the throat to use. You are able to ingest nicotine more quickly. And what they're trying to do is replicate the experience of smoking a cigarette, which no other company had done up until this point. The challenge with these new devices and with this new form of intaking nicotine is we know the behavior of a cigarette smoker. So if somebody is taking a cigarette and smoking one cigarette, we know that they are getting there's 10 milligrams approximately of tobacco or of nicotine in each cigarette. We know that they're going to take about 10 puffs off of that cigarette, and we know that they're going to absorb about 1 milligram of nicotine. We know that they're probably going to smoke half a pack to a pack a day. They can connect how much they pack. So when they go to Dr. Tong or to other providers and get help quitting, they can say, I smoke 20 cigarettes a day, and physicians can then help them quit with FDA approved medications. With vaping devices, we don't know that because a lot of young people that we work with, we heard this the other day, puff, puff, pass. So they're sharing devices. They're taking 2 to 3 second inhales instead of the 1 second inhale off of a cigarette. So there is no way of really knowing at this point how much nicotine people are getting from these devices. And that is a nightmare when it comes to helping people quit. And so the first time since I've been working in tobacco control, which is over 18 years, this is the first time that we've ever seen teenagers self-identify as being addicted to nicotine solutions. And when they ask, well, how do we quit? Our best practices come back to the behavioral health side of it, of just looking at triggers and when do you use and how do we help from that side. But when it comes to the element of the NRTs or the pharmaceutical side, we just don't know. There's no best practices yet for these products because it's really difficult to know how much nicotine people are getting. And it's alarming. If you go to a school and you talk to teens who are using these products, I talked to some young people and they said, well, how many times a day do your peers vape? And we know perceptions are higher than reality, but they told us, probably about 50 times. And I said, so they're smoking off their Juul 50 times. They're like, no, 50 smoking sessions. So how many hits per session are they getting? So they're just getting nicotine throughout the entire day. So there are all sorts of devices. The last time I talked to our Attorney General's office, there were over 30 lookalike products in California that they were tracking. We are paying particular attention to Juul, not just because of the device, but because of the power of the industry. So we know the industry has lobbyists in Sacramento. We know the industry is now owned 35% by Philip Morris, who is the original cigarette maker of Marlboro. So we know that Juul is replicating the behavior of tobacco companies, and they have a lot of power and they have a lot of money. But there are other devices. Fix, we see a lot. Sorn, we've been seeing a lot. These ones, you can either get a pre-filled pod or you fill it yourself and you get your own solution that you want. So there's a lot of these different devices out, and the newest thing, again, is it's a smaller battery, which makes it more discreet, less vapor that the individual can see to the eye, so people are using them in schools. And then they're also easier in some cases for young people to get because they can get them in stores online. People don't know what they are, and they're coming up so quickly. So what the research is showing, and this we also are hearing in the focus groups that we do with young people, why are young people using these products? So the first is it's normalized for them. They see their friends using it. They see their families using it. This is exactly what we're trying to do in tobacco control by all of the strong policy work we're doing, is we're trying to change the norms so that when young people don't see the products, it's not normalized, and then the desire to use decreases. But when they see all of their friends use, we ask teens, do you know anybody that Juuls? They all say, yeah, or yes, I know all of my friends vape. And it's not all. Dr. Tong shared the data, so we know it's not everybody that is using it, but we see it, and that's the perception. The number 2 reason is flavored. So that new data that came out from the Department of Public Health Tobacco Control Program that shows that the majority of young people who are using any of these tobacco products are using flavored products. To me, is the single most influential piece of data that we have to show if we were to remove flavored products from the market, we would save so many lives of young people and African Americans. Because when you have 70% of a population that is using a flavored tobacco product, think about the number of people we would prevent from using and the number of people we would encourage to quit. And so that is huge. And then the last part is that there is this belief and this idea that these products are less harmful. And as Dr. Tong had talked about, there's a lot of research we don't know yet. These are newer products, so we don't have data to say that 30 years of using these products will lead to X, Y, and Z disease. But we know a lot about nicotine, and we know a lot about the products that we have today. And it's that question of, do we say, yes, this is safer than cigarettes, or it's not a safe product at all? So why would we promote it? Why would we encourage use and not just prevent it? The same way that we didn't know 70 years ago how destructive and harmful cigarettes were, and look at all the lives we could have saved if we had that science then. So this comes from the Department of Public Health, and this is really designed for parents and for educators to help them be aware of the products that young people are using. It's important to note with Juul specifically that the majority of users are teens, are young people. So there was a new study that just came out last week that said of the adults who are vaping Juuls, they're not vaping a Juul to switch from cigarettes, which is what Juul argues. They're arguing that it's helping people switch from tobacco. So the majority of adults who were using it were actually not using it to switch. They were still smoking and vaping. But most of Juul users are teens, are young adults and teens. And so that's really, really alarming. And what the Department of Public Health is really trying to do to educate parents is to help them understand what nicotine addiction looks like and start having those conversations with young people of this is what addiction looks like and this is what addiction feels like, so that they can know how can you help address that. So some concerns that our team has, and we do a lot of work with youth and young adults to help them change the norms of their community, that when you look at these products, there is substantial research that shows that young people who never would consider using a tobacco product like cigarettes or smokeless tobacco, they're much more likely to experiment with vaping, and that experimentation then goes on to other addictions. So it goes on to dual use, it goes on to use of other substances such as marijuana. So vaping is officially a gateway drug for young people who never would have considered ever using tobacco. We also know that there are higher rates of these products among youth and young adult populations. So Dr. Tong just showed that newest research from the Department of Public Health. We know that most adult consumers are still smoking cigarettes, and the populations that are vaping are youth and young adults in California. We also know that the nicotine levels in these products are extraordinarily high. They're currently unregulated. And so when we talk about Juul and we talk about the amount of nicotine in those Juul pods, we're at the mercy of the industry that is selling these products to trust what they're saying they're putting in their pods until we know. There's so many questions we have to figure out. How much nicotine is actually in the Juul pod? What is the behavior of individuals using these products? How much nicotine are they actually absorbing? And this is a question that can be replicated for every single product that's out there. We also know that young people are using these products differently. So gone is the day when somebody bought a pack of cigarette and smoked a pack of cigarette and that was all. When we are hearing that kids are hiding under desks, that they're coming out of their classrooms and sharing their devices, we know, I've talked to a young person who said, oh yeah, everybody knows the bathrooms are now Juul rooms, they don't go in there, so instead what they're doing is they're just going into where home ec is, and there's other cooking smells in there, so they just hide in there and vape because nobody would question that there's a mango smell in there. Or they're putting on lotion, oh that sweet smell, it's just my lotion, it's not my vape that I was just using. So we know that this is actually happening. And in public health, we don't want to encourage people to switch. We want to encourage people to quit. We know the single best thing any tobacco user can do is to quit completely. We have best practices. We've been doing it for a long time. We can continue to do it without the help of an industry that is profiting off of these young people for their own income. So when we talk about schools, how are we addressing this in California? So California's tobacco control program as a whole is very complex, and I, again, could spend hours talking about that, but there are efforts within the schools and in the community to address this. So from a school front, the Department of Education funds tobacco use prevention education programs, or TUPE programs. So that is very prevention-based programming that's in the school. Stanford has created an awesome toolkit that educators can use. It has pre-designed PowerPoints that they can give to young people to help them understand what's going on. Our team has been working with campuses across the state to help them adopt smoke and tobacco-free policies. The idea is that if we can remove tobacco use from the communities of young adults on campuses, we can again change that norm and help encourage quit attempts. Our biggest obstacle with all of this work right now is the reality that we are doing a lot of good work when it comes to detecting cigarette smoking on campus. Now we're trying to figure out how do we increase compliance with vaping when it's so easy to hide. And then we're doing a lot of work with community colleges, but their policy-making structure is very different, so it's a campus-by-campus way of doing it. But we are getting there and doing a lot of promotion and education around the way. And then locally, California's tobacco control model is if we go out and we change the norm, we remove products from our communities, we remove secondhand smoke, we change that norm, and then we have less people who want to be using these products. And the focus is on let's get rid of secondhand smoke, let's get rid of the waste of tobacco products. So when we talk about waste, we're not just talking about cigarette butts that never go away. We're talking about Juul pods that are littered all over. We're talking about battery waste. There's so much waste when it comes to tobacco. We're talking about retail environments that have tobacco up front, have aggressive advertising and marketing outdoors, and you got to bet that these stores are also more predominantly placed in communities of color and low-income communities in California, and then also supporting people in quitting. So one of the things that we're focusing on right now is changing the retail environment, because we know, as much as we hear people say, well, kids are still just getting these things online. They may be getting them online, but the reality is the research is showing that youth are still getting these products from social sources, which means friends. We hear stories about them paying homeless people to go into stores and buy them the products, or they're going into retail environments they know of that don't card or turn their heads when somebody is coming in. So they're getting these things locally and in stores. A national study found that 74% of teens who were using Juul purchased their products in a local store. And when you look at recent data to look at these illegal sales, you can see the biggest offenders were tobacco 21 stores. So stores you have to be 21 to go into to get these products, and that is where teens are most successful in buying their products. So trying to do stronger regulation for these retailers is simply not enough. We know that tobacco is all over our community. There are retailers all over the state who are selling. The majority of them are selling flavored tobacco, and the majority of those that are in our school are selling the products. So again, I want to emphasize it's not just about having the products that are being sold, it's about all of the advertising and marketing that is happening that kids are seeing as they're walking to and from their school that is just perpetuating and encouraging that use. And this is so problematic because we know if people are not addicted by the age of 25, they will never use tobacco. So as much as the industry says they're not targeting youth, they're not targeting young adults, they have to, because only 1% of anyone who ever starts using these products starts after the age of 26. And so they have to get it into the hands of young people. Most young people experiment before the age of 18 and they become addicted between 18 and 24, but 25 is really that cutoff age. And so how we're responding in tobacco control is that we are really seeking to engage our community members to identify the problems and then go out and advocate for policies that would fit best in the communities that we're serving. And so historically, we have worked on secondhand smoke policies. We've been very successful with secondhand smoke policies, and there's a lot of data. But we live in a new era with these tobacco products. They have changed, and we are changing the way that we're doing policy. So looking in the retail environment, and now we've had some really brave cities who have taken that step and are now starting to ban the sale of all flavored products in communities as a whole. We even have one community, Beverly Hills, that banned the sale of all tobacco products with the exception of cigars. So there's a lot of really aggressive work that's going on. And you can see there's over 35 communities in the state who have done this work, and it's continuing. And this work comes from partnerships of community members, community allies. The work that happened here in Sacramento, of which UC Davis was a huge part of, they provided a lot of education and support for this work. Dr. Tong and her team at UC Davis shared a lot of stories about the realities that they see with patients that they serve. There was this great panel that really talked about what is this problem locally and how should our decision makers be addressing this. So there's a lot of work that is left to be done. In the state of California, we've always been most successful at starting locally and then it grows up. And what we know is that the best model for reducing tobacco use and encouraging quit attempts is to change the norm completely by removing the products, not by putting Band-Aids over things. So just in summary, again, we know that the industry has done a lot to addict communities in our state. Nationally, we could have a whole conversation about what the industry is doing overseas, which they did here 50 years ago. We changed laws. They can't do it here anymore, but they're still doing it overseas. We know that we have a new epidemic in California and nationally with vaping. We're collectively working at how do we address that. There's health concerns, there's addiction concerns, there's all sorts of concerns that we have. And our best strategy to do this is to work collectively and to work broadly to be able to prevent this epidemic from getting out of hand. Thank you.